You ever notice how the folks who shout the loudest about rules are usually the first ones to twist them to fit whatever they want? I used to think that was just a saying until I met a woman who tried to have me arrested for digging a hole on my own land. Yeah, you heard that right, a hole. A legal, permitted, fully documented agricultural well. By the time the dust settled, she'd lost her cattle, her HOA crown, and her reputation. But back when it started, I had no idea the fight would go that far. For me, it all began with peace. After 20 years of consulting as a hydrogeologist, that's just a fancy way of saying I'm a water nerd who helps cities and farmers manage groundwater. I finally saved enough to buy the kind of property I'd been studying my whole career. 300 acres of rolling grassland outside a little Texas town called Willow Bend. The kind of place where you can hear the wind, see the stars, and forget the rest of the world exists. The ranch wasn't fancy. The old farmhouse leaned a little, and the fences had seen better decades. But it had a creek that ran clear even in summer and soil that smelled like promise. I planned to fix it up slow, new fences, a few head of cattle, maybe some crops once I had the irrigation set up. It was going to be my forever project, something to build, not just own. The land used to be part of a massive spread, the Mallory Ranch, back when this whole valley was still working country. About 15 years earlier, a developer carved 50 acres off the southern end and built a luxury community called Oak Ridge Estates. You know the type: oversized houses, undersized lots, gated entry, and a homeowners association with more rules than common sense. My 300 acres wrapped around that little patch of suburbia on 3 sides. A sea of green surrounding an island of beige. And here's the thing. My land was completely independent. I wasn't part of their HOA. No dues, no restrictions, no committees deciding what color I could paint my barn. I figured they'd keep to their world, and I'd keep to mine. I couldn't have been more wrong. For the first few months, everything was heaven. I spent my mornings mending fences, my afternoons walking the creek bed with a notebook, and my evenings on the porch listening to coyotes sing. The existing domestic well worked fine for the house, but if I wanted to run cattle or irrigate the lower fields, I'd need an agricultural well. High yield, deep, properly cased. I designed hundreds for clients. Now I finally got to drill one for myself. Getting the permit was routine. I filed the geological survey, submitted flow projections, and within 2 weeks the county approved it. I didn't just follow the rules. I wrote half of them in my consulting work. I figured everything would go smoothly. Then I met Sandra, the president of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. The first time I saw her, I was checking the fence line that ran behind her property. She came marching down her manicured lawn in bright white sneakers, yelling over the sound of a Bluetooth speaker blasting pop music. She looked like the kind of person who schedules her arguments. "Excuse me," she shouted, waving her tumbler at me. "You're too close to the community perimeter. That's a noise violation." I shut off the ATV, let the birds start chirping again, and pointed at the old barbed wire fence. "Ma'am, this is my property. The fence is the boundary. I'm 5 feet inside my side of it." She squinted like she was trying to see my soul. "The HOA covenants require a 50-foot buffer from the perimeter fence. We paid for peace and quiet." I tried to be polite. "Your HOA's rules stop right at that fence. Over here, it's just me and the state of Texas." That didn't go over well. She spun on her heel and said, "We'll see about that." Her husband, Rick, was watching from the patio. A man who looked like he'd lost every argument since the wedding day. A week later, I got my first letter. Official seal, fancy letterhead, Oak Ridge Estates Architectural Review Committee. It informed me that my barn, painted traditional red, clashed with the community's approved earth tone palette. They suggested I repaint it beige to maintain visual harmony. The barn was half a mile from their nearest house. I laughed, tossed the letter in the trash, and didn't think about it again. I should have known it was only the opening move. When the drilling rig arrived, a monster truck-mounted machine with diesel engines that could wake the dead, I felt like a kid on Christmas morning. The crew were old friends of mine, pros who knew what they were doing. We set up a quarter-mile from the HOA boundary, deliberately choosing the spot farthest from any houses. I figured that would keep the peace. By 9 a.m., Sandra's white Lexus came barreling up my gravel drive like a charging bull. She stopped sideways in front of the rig, blocking the support truck. Out she came, designer sunglasses, wide-brim hat, linen outfit that probably cost more than the drill's tires. What is the meaning of this? She barked, pointing at the rig. This is a major industrial operation. The noise, the dust, this is unacceptable. I stayed calm. Good morning to you too. This is my property, and this is a permitted well. Here's the paperwork if you'd like to see it. She didn't even glance at the permit. I was not notified. The HOA was not consulted. You're jeopardizing our community's water supply. Our wells could run dry because of your recklessness. That was her first mention of water, and right then I knew that word would come back to haunt me. Ma'am, I said, the aquifer we're tapping is vast. Your wells and mine draw from entirely different layers. This well won't affect you. She interrupted with a dismissive wave. Save your pseudoscientific jargon. My husband and I understand resource management. He's on the Cattlemen's Association board. Rick's herd, 30 longhorns on 15 acres, was more of an Instagram accessory than a ranch. They used more water on their decorative pasture than my entire operation ever would. I forced a smile. Your responsibilities end at your fence line. We're legal, permitted, and careful. Now, please move your vehicle so the crew can work. She folded her arms. You'll regret this. I'll take my chances, I said, and waved to Hank, the driller. Fire it up. The engine roared to life, drowning out whatever curse she shouted as she stomped back to her car. I figured that was the end of it. I underestimated her. 2 days later, just as the crew was finishing the casing, 2 sheriff's SUVs rolled up, lights flashing. My stomach dropped. Even when you know you're innocent, flashing lights on your property feel like judgment. The older deputy, name tag said Miller, walked up, hand resting on his belt. Morning. We got a report of illegal activity. Something about unpermitted commercial drilling and theft of county water. I took a breath. Deputy, everything we're doing is permitted. Here's the documentation from the county, the geological survey, the contractor's license, and the insurance. He looked through the folder carefully, then walked back to his cruiser, radio dispatch, and double-checked the permit numbers. After 10 minutes, he returned, handed me the folder, and said, All right, sir, looks like you're completely in order. Sorry for the interruption. We have to respond to every call. Let me guess, I said. The caller drives a white Lexus. He smirked. Can't confirm that, but let's just say we're familiar with that address. When they left, Hank spat a line of tobacco juice and muttered, Some people got more money than sense. He wasn't wrong. That day changed something in me. Up to that point, I'd been reactive, trying to keep peace, mind my business. But when someone calls the cops on you for drilling a legal well, that's not ignorance. That's malice. And in that moment, I decided I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make sure she never pulled that stunt on anyone else again. She wanted a war over water? Fine. I'm a hydrogeologist. She picked the wrong battlefield. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse and headed straight to the records basement, the place where old deeds and plat maps go to collect dust. I pulled everything tied to the Oak Ridge development and the original Mallory Ranch parcel. There it was, a giant map showing how the ranch had been subdivided 15 years earlier. The developer carved out 50 acres for the HOA, drilled 2 community wells, and filed easements granting the new homeowners access to water. Standard stuff. But something was missing, the formal transfer of water rights. When you split a large tract, the original water rights have to be severed and redeeded to the new owner. It hadn't been done. On paper, the HOA had permission to use water, but not ownership of it. The senior rights, the legal title to the groundwater, still belonged to the original ranch. And that ranch, as of last year, belonged entirely to me. I stared at that omission until my heart started racing. It was like finding a buried switch that could shut off an entire town. Still, I needed confirmation. There was one man who would know for sure. Earl, the old foreman of the Mallory Ranch. I found him sitting on his porch 2 miles down the road, fixing a saddle older than I was. Earl, I asked, do you remember when they sold off that southern parcel to the developer? He chuckled. Sure do. Fella came in wearing a city suit, and a cowboy hat still had the price tag on it. Old man Mallory told him, you can use the water, but it stays ours. They shook on it. No papers, just pride. So the water rights were never sold. Not a drop, Earl said. Mallory used to laugh, said if that fancy subdivision ever dried up, he'd buy it back for pennies. Land's worthless without water, he told me. Well, guess who owned that land now? I thanked Earl for the tea and drove straight to the office of Marcus Dean, the best water rights attorney in 3 counties. Marcus was semi-retired, white-haired, and mean in the courtroom in the nicest possible way. He looked over the deeds and smiled like a wolf spotting a wounded calf. "Son, this is the most beautiful screw-up I've ever seen. You, my friend, are the legal owner of every drop running under that HOA. They've been pumping your water for 15 years. Can I stop them?" "You could," he said, "but that'd make you the villain. What you can do is make them pay for what they've been stealing, and do it by the book." We spent the next week building a strategy. Step 1. Demolish their pending injunction against my well with hard science. Step 2. Reveal, at the county hearing, that they didn't even own the water they were so desperate to protect. Step 3. Offer them a fair, permanent agreement that would secure their supply, while making sure Sandra paid dearly for her arrogance. We drafted a new water use and easement agreement. It granted every Oak Ridge homeowner a perpetual right to draw water from the aquifer under my land for a small annual maintenance fee. In return, they'd recognize my senior rights and stop interfering with my operations. But the document had one special clause: commercial users, defined as anyone running livestock or irrigating more than an acre for profit, would pay full market rate for agricultural water. Guess who that applied to? Sandra and her husband, Rick, with their vanity herd of longhorns. Marcus called it a surgical strike. The day of the hearing, the county boardroom was packed. Sandra arrived in a Navy power suit, hair sprayed to perfection, whispering to her lawyer like a general before battle. Rick puffed out his chest beside her. They looked smug, confident, already celebrating. When the session started, their lawyer launched into a sermon about protecting the community's fragile ecosystem. Rick testified about his heritage cattle operation and the devastating consequences of my well. Then Sandra took the floor, eyes glistening with fake emotion, talking about the children and our sacred way of life. It was a masterpiece of melodrama, and it would have worked on anyone who didn't know the science. Then Marcus stood. No theatrics, no grandstanding. He spoke in that calm, measured voice that makes juries lean forward. "My client," he began, "is a licensed hydrogeologist with 20 years of experience. The claims made by the Oak Ridge HOA are, to put it gently, imaginative." For the next 20 minutes, he presented the data I'd compiled: aquifer models, flow maps, recharge rates, peer-reviewed studies. By the time he finished, their imminent catastrophe had been reduced to statistical noise. The board members nodded. Even the chairman looked bored of Sandra's side. And then Marcus changed tone. "However," he said, "this petition forced us to examine the legal history of the properties involved, and we discovered something remarkable." He pulled out 2 bound documents: the original Mallory Ranch deed and the subdivision deed for Oak Ridge. When the developer created this community, he granted an easement for water access, but he never severed or transferred the senior water rights. Those rights remain with the parent parcel, the Mallory Ranch, now owned in full by my client. Silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Marcus looked directly at Sandra. "For 15 years, the HOA has been pumping water it does not own. My client holds the senior rights. Every gallon drawn from those wells is, legally speaking, his." The color drained from her face. Her lawyer shot to his feet. "This is outrageous." The chairman frowned. "Counselor, can you dispute the record?" The lawyer stammered. We need time to review." Marcus didn't let him off the hook. "The evidence is from county archives. Public record. Verified. My client doesn't wish to cut off water to his neighbors. He's a reasonable man, which is why we're offering this." He handed the chairman copies of the new agreement. "This document corrects the 15-year oversight. It grants the HOA a permanent, legal right to their water in exchange for a modest annual fee to maintain the wells." Then he paused, eyes locked on Sandra. "It also ensures fairness by establishing commercial usage rates for high-volume consumers, such as livestock operations." Every head in the room turned toward her. The effect was immediate and brutal. Rick's jaw dropped. Sandra's hands trembled as she read the clause. She realized she'd just handed us the power to bankrupt her hobby ranch. Her own lawsuit had opened the door to her undoing. The chairman looked at their lawyer. "So, your clients have been using water they don't own, and the other side is offering to legalize it?" "Yes, sir," Marcus said, "and to protect the rest of the community in perpetuity." The lawyer whispered frantically to Sandra, then stood. Mr. Chairman, the HOA withdraws its petition. Smart choice, the chairman muttered. When it was over, several Oak Ridge homeowners came up to shake my hand. One man said, "We really don't own our water?" "Not technically," I told him, "but sign that agreement and you'll never have to worry again." They nodded gratefully. They saw me not as the villain Sandra painted, but as the guy who saved their homes from a hidden time bomb. Sandra didn't speak to anyone. She just gathered her papers with shaking hands and stormed out. Within a week, the HOA board held a special election. The vote to remove her passed almost unanimously. She went from Queen Bee to exile overnight. The new board signed the water agreement immediately. Things got quiet again. Rick sold his longhorns. He couldn't afford the new commercial rates, and their lush green pasture turned brown under the Texas sun. A for sale sign went up not long after. The last time I saw them, they were loading boxes into that same white Lexus. She saw me out by the fence line on my ATV, and for a second, our eyes met. No words, just years of arrogance collapsing into silence. Then she drove away. Now, every morning when I check the well gauge, I think about how close she came to ruining me, and how, in trying to control everything, she lost it all. It still amazes me. She called the cops because she thought she owned the rules. But she forgot the oldest rule of all. Before you start a war, make sure you own the battlefield. So what would you have done? Would you have fought back or just let it go? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment, hit that like button if you enjoyed the story, and tell me where you're watching from. Because sometimes justice doesn't come with sirens or judges. Sometimes it comes from a man with a shovel, a map, and the nerve to keep digging until the truth comes up with the water.